Hi, this is Josh, and I got a question from someone inside my training at PM Student eLearning, and I wanted to answer that question here in the form of a video, and I thought it'd be good to share with everyone else as well. So the question was about objectives versus scope on a project, and in general, it got my mind thinking about the different types of scope, and that's what I'd really like to talk about here today. But to answer the original question, I see objectives as things that you're going to put in a project charter or in a business case, really high level, goals for the project essentially. And scope is talking a little bit more about the details of how you're going to carry that out. So the sum total of the scope is going to equal the project as a whole, but that's kind of how I see the interrelationship there. Now it got me thinking about the fact that there are two different types of scope, and a lot of people kind of gloss over the dichotomy between these two different types of scope. And I think it's important, mainly from a scope management perspective, to understand these. So there's project scope and then there's product scope. And these are the two types of scope that you as a project manager need to manage on your projects. So when I say project scope, I'm talking about the actual work that it's taking to carry it out. These are the implementation details of the project. It includes things like rework. So if you have to go back and do something again and it takes twice as long, you've increased your project scope even though your product scope may have stayed the same. When we say product scope, we're talking about features, functionality, requirements, user stories. This is what the end user is going to get. This is the value of the product that's being delivered. And so in my experience, the changes for product scope are mostly customer driven. They can be driven by the project team, but they're mostly customer driven. And so these are, again, changes to the features, functionality, requirements, and user stories, those types of things. Whereas the changes to the project scope can be driven by anyone. This is gold plating. This is choosing a different way to do the actual implementation that's going to, be twice as long, twice as much work to implement as another. You would have doubled your project scope with your product scope being exactly the same. One thing that I'd like to point out is that when it comes to an agile project, your product scope, really your product scope is changing all the time because what the customer wants is changing during the course of the project. One of the things that agile or lean methodologies do is they have a feedback loop built in where you're getting feedback about the changes in the product scope in a real-time fashion or nearly real-time fashion. So that's getting updated all the time, and there's a change management process built into those methodologies to be able to account for that. With waterfall, you're still getting product scope changes, but they're going through things like formal requirement, CCRs and things like that. A lot of times product scope changes aren't managed very well on waterfall projects. Not always, but that can definitely be the case. So that's one of the reasons why personally I like more the agile lean methods, because that's one of the things that they do really well, I think, is help to manage the product scope and to acknowledge the fact that what the customer wants is changing as you go through it, and you're putting stuff in front of them and you're getting feedback on that so that you make sure that when you get done, the product scope is really what they want, not what they wrote down on a piece of paper at the beginning of the project, but what they really need is what you produce. And then back up to the project scope, it's that this is also something that you need to really pay attention to. Like I said, it can come from anywhere. It can come from your project team. It can come from the customer. It can come from, somebody who isn't really directly impacted by the project, but they're an executive that, influences someone else or whatever. So implementation details, what tools you use, what programming languages you use, all that kind of stuff can have an impact on the project scope, even if the product scope doesn't change. So I thought that dichotomy was helpful, and thanks very much.